All right, so thanks for having me. This talk is called Deduplicating the Enterprise. And no matter where I end on this talk, hopefully you will have learned something. So, a little history. This place is called Mahanoy City in Pennsylvania. And it turns out that cable TV was first tried in Pennsylvania, which I didn't know. So while working on this talk, I decided to look up the history of cable because I work at a cable company to see the progress of technology in the cable industry. And I was like, oh, cable was tried first in Pennsylvania, according to Wikipedia. So who knows if that's right. So who remembers this when watching TV when I was a child? Right, so these were like the battle days when the guide was really slow. We got this from a vendor, or companies would get a guide from a vendor. All their software was built by a vendor. And changes wouldn't happen. Like there would be like one rollout a year or one rollout every 6 months. So if there was a bug that you introduced at some point in time, good luck getting it fixed, right? So that was okay at that time, right? So for companies, most large companies kind of have a similar story software-wise. You usually get there first, or you usually solve something first, where you grow so quickly, and then you get behind the curve, right? Because software is moving and it's constantly changing. And the newer companies, let's say like a newer streaming company, gets to take advantage of all the new goodies that are coming out, like the public cloud, or certain types of new ways of thinking of engineering. But that doesn't mean that your old enterprise or your current enterprise can't go into that direction. And then there's constantly this pendulum swinging back and forth, right? So there might be like, hey, we want to do this new thing, and then we realize that it's really expensive. And then finance gets really scared, and it says, we don't want to do that anymore. We're going to go back to that whole thing. So how do you balance those things? So fast forward, I don't know how many years now, we can talk to the TV. And this is the voice remote, 2 iterations of it. And we kind of could consider ourselves, I'm going nameless for a while, and then I'll introduce who I work for and stuff like that. So this is a voice remote. You can talk to the TV. It has changed how you watch TV. Like, I cannot go to my parents' house and watch their TV because I have to browse, right? I don't know what channel things are on. So we got there by sort of reinventing ourselves, right? And sort of becoming a tech company. And the way that I would think of our company is like, we moved to a new place. Let's say we moved to like France, and we sort of know the language and we could communicate with people on a basic level. But we don't get the inside jokes, so we don't know where the cool spots are. So that's where we want to go, right? To be native to the land. What does the talk mean? So I called the talk. I wrote this talk late at night, and I thought I made up the word deduplication, but it turns out it's a real word. And the summary of it means to eliminate redundant information, and it's mostly used in computer land, so like removing redundant files or whatever, right? So what does deduplicate mean in the context of this talk and the context of Comcast, which is where I work? So there are like 4 or 5 things that I came up with to sort of support this word or define this word. And the first thing is we want to reduce the amount of undifferentiated lifting that teams are doing. So no longer do we want you to run your own Cassandra clusters or your own CI/CD platform. Like, let's try to sort of bring those together and provide common services where it makes sense. So at one point in time, I mentioned that Comcast was very vendor heavy. The pendulum swung to the other side where we gave everyone freedom to do what they wanted, right? So like each organization, each team got to make their decision. We also staffed them very largely so they can do whatever they want, which turned out not to be a good idea. So the pendulum is swinging back, right? So during that journey, we realized that folks making their own choices is very important, and it makes them happy, and it makes them do their best work. So we still want to provide like common platforms where it makes sense, but still allow them to have that freedom of choice. So maybe instead of forcing them to use one technology, we support them to say, hey, like this is what you should strive for when you're looking for technology, right? So as I mentioned, like right now there are multiple, if you go to a conference, maybe this conference, there are probably vendors here, and we probably use all of them. So we want to reduce the amount of churn and technology choice where it makes sense. The other thing we want to do is sort of provide like a path for teams to go make a decision, right? So like let's say you're researching a queuing system. Hopefully there's like some document or someone has published their findings about queuing systems X, Y, and Z, and you don't have to start from zero. You can start at some base level that everyone has access to. You can read the cons and the pros that someone went through, and start at a higher level, and then focus on what you really need to focus on, which is the business part of things. We want to improve developer experience. So let's say firewalls. Everyone struggles with firewalls at their companies probably. Probably not like a newer startup. Or creating a new AWS account. Like, how could we improve that process and thinking about that? The other thing is we want to take advantage of our scale. So we have lots of developers who are very talented. So let's say like we have a large Python usage story. How can we come across or come up with like a Python stack that makes sense for most cases that we would have a good knowledge base for? So like a good HTTP library, a good framework. So folks could get started on their project, start working on the business part of the project, and deliver that faster to the consumer. And the other thing is we just want to reduce friction overall, because we're all developers at one time. We all faced the problems that we were trying to fix, so we want to make it better. So why do we want to do this, right? So I mentioned earlier, we have cool products now. We're making money. We're pretty reliable. Some people still like us. Some people still don't like us. That's a hard thing to fix. And we're constantly evolving. So why do we want to do this? Why do we want to change things and get away from what we're doing? Because we believe in continuous improvement, right? It's a huge part of our culture, or currently it is anyway. It has become that. So we're always trying to think, what can we do better to deliver more value to the customer? So whether that means like adding features to your Wi-Fi, which you might have heard in the commercials, like X-Fi is no longer Wi-Fi, or making the voice remote better. So being able to like deliver those features quicker to customers and deliver more of them in the year. We want to improve quality of our services. So you might see online that people are complaining about outages or whatnot. So like, how do we get around those things? How do we catch them before the customer sees them? We want to operate cheaper, right? So make our products run more efficiently. So we can invest that money in either more products or into our employees or to our customer base. And then going back to like where we started, like in the 1960s to now, we've bought a lot of companies. We've also integrated with a lot of companies. So you can imagine that Comcast and the larger Comcast, NBC Universal is a very complex machine, right? Like to figure out like where something is going wrong, or over time, like people have just like built things and taken their architect's word for it that it should work. So no more architects. So this talk is mostly about that journey, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've been doing. I'm going to breeze through some of them and hopefully spend some time on some others about how we're doing that, how we are trying to continuously improve ourselves. So the first thing that needed to happen was leadership needed to recognize that this was useful, right? So either you get all of them to read the Accelerate book, which is very popular now, or some book that they read somewhere, or someone gave a good talk that they went to, and recognized that. Also, no one laughed at that joke, but we had to admit that this is important, and it was not only for like making developers happy. Like these things had direct business impact. So we had to get everyone on the same page, so everyone paddling to the same island. Because it doesn't make sense if one org is doing something counter to the other, because then we're just fighting against each other. So we need to make sure that it's part of our conversation every day, and it's part of our principles. So we're working towards this constantly. The next thing that we did is invested, right? An example of investing in engineering is this building. If you haven't visited this building, I could totally give you a tour at some point. And this building was built for just the engineers, right? And as corny as that sounds, it actually has had an impact on us based on our collaboration and the design of the building. Turns out open spaces are bad, but they're also good. So the next thing we did is identify the areas. So looking across the organization, what are the areas that we should focus on? What are our weaknesses that we should go work on to improve the maturity and the capabilities of the company? So we call this the software strategy. And this is a living document that changes over time. So based on the needs of the industry or the needs of the company, this is allowed to change. But it's this document that you can go and refer to anyone in the company, go read it and understand where we're going and what are Comcast's thoughts on software delivery and building software. So initially, and so far, we've come up with 5 themes. And the 5 themes are, we want to accelerate. So accelerating your delivery to production, or your delivery, or accelerating a bug fix to production, and just moving faster, right? But safely. So maybe that means using higher level services in the public cloud. We want to be cheaper and be more cost efficient. There was a time where we shielded engineers from finance, but we want to change that. So how could we get engineering involved in finance and educate them about some of these topics so they can make informed decisions about what they're doing? Going back to the complex system thing, we want to reduce our complexity, right? So we want to run less infrastructure, or be responsible for less services. And then improving our quality, so doing things like error budgets. And the last one is leaning into open source. So whether that be using open source or giving back to open source, or just publishing our own open source libraries. So the next thing we did is form a team around this. This is not the actual, this is a larger department, but I didn't have a picture of just a team. So that's another example of investing, right? So hiring a group of people that are skilled in this area of changing an organization at large to do this. And then I'm part of that team, and my official title is developer advocate, which people are usually surprised about, like Comcast having a developer advocate. So what do? We just go around talking about the mission. We try to collaborate with people because there's only a few of us. I think there are 4 or 5 of us now. So we can't scale to the size of Comcast, so we have to figure out clever ways to sort of get things out of our brains or scale our efforts, right? So the first things that we do is work with the less mature teams or less capable teams and sort of bridge those gaps that might be missing for them. So let's say that they are just moving to some public cloud and they're not aware of the security rules in there. So working with them and bringing security along and helping them out that way. The other thing that we do is try to find high-performing teams in the company. So who are teams that are already doing continuous delivery or are really good at automated testing, and sort of encourage them to give internal talks, give brown bags, and publish their work somewhere. So then folks could go reference that and sort of plug in some of their tactics. The other thing is we try to form virtual orgs. So this is a picture of us at dinner. Comcast has a Cloud Center of Excellence, also another corny term. but we needed a name, and the industry had a name for us. So this is a cross-cutting team across organizations that has security folks in it, network folks in it, and software architecture, which is my group. So when we approach a problem, we approach it from with all lenses in the room, and from making sure that all of us are supported and things are getting done with the right principles and mindset. The other thing my team started doing this year is building reference implementations. So basically, like a reference app that's usable. So our current reference application is our Lab Week portal. Our Lab Week is just a week, 3 weeks out of the year that Comcast employees get to work on whatever they want to. So usually pitch an idea and you submit it through the portal. So we took up the work on the portal and started integrating best practices into that. So you know, we maybe containers are part of our strategy. So deploying the app onto like something like ECS. So a team could go reference the application, maybe not pick up the code base and adopt the full ECS stuff, but just see how it works. It also allows us to experience some of the pain points in the company. So like how do you get connectivity back to on-premise from the public cloud? And it also allows us to extract learnings, right? So maybe writing a blog post or publishing a Terraform module from the project. The other thing that we've been doing is recording our thoughts. And this is good because it prevents you from repeating yourself over and over, right? So like the one that comes to mind for us is we have a cloud strategy, which is basically a decision framework of when to use which cloud, whether it be private or public. And folks could go read this document and basically go through the flow. And it's like a document with a bunch of ifs, right, and else's. And we were super happy one day and realized that this is paying off when we saw it being shared in Slack. Someone asked about, the cloud and which cloud to use, and someone shared it without us doing that. And the one that I want to get into today is architecture gills. So this has a link to an InfoQ article that my boss wrote that goes into this in a much deeper fashion. But this has had a lot of success for us. So this is our framework, like sort of cobbled together with a bunch of things that facilitates forming consensus across the company, right? So at any level of team, it's mostly happening at the organization-wide, so like all of engineering, to come to a conclusion on some problem, or come to a conclusion for a solution for some problem that we're facing. So how does it work? So it's modeled after some of the standard body stuff, so after the IETF, and also this concept called ADRs, which I have a link to later. So first, someone has to think up a problem, or face a problem, or many people have to face a problem, or maybe just the organization thinks of a problem, and they have to write this thing called a charter. And a charter is just a fancy word for saying the scope of this working group and what is it going to solve, right? So this is the first one that we did, which is source control, or for source control. And basically came to the conclusion that we should use GitHub Enterprise. It was an easy one because we were already using GitHub Enterprise at scale. But it was just to try out the formula and see how it would work and see how we would do with this, right? So I don't know if you could see that, but it just says the scope of this working group is targeted to version control. And it also has things that we won't talk about, which are out of scope continuous integration, right? So that's for another one. So the next thing that we do is we announce this, right? So we have an architecture channel with, I don't know, maybe like 1,000 people on it or more. And then each working group gets its own Slack channel that starts with the name arch-w. So if someone were to join the company for the first time and they wanted to see all the working groups, they could just type arch-w and see them. The reason that we emphasize on Slack so much and not in-person meetings is because the company is distributed, and we don't want anyone to like miss out because they can make a meeting or they live somewhere else. But if everything happens over Slack and GitHub, we make sure that it's documented and they can go back and see the pull request and see the thought process behind something. All right, and then we have a mailing list with all the engineers. 10 minutes? Okay, cool. I should be done. That also gets mailed out to. And then we recruit 2 or 3 co-chairs, and these co-chairs are maybe not people that are versed in the topic, but they are good at communication. It turns out that communication is very important, and it's not all about engineering, right? Because engineers tend to be mean sometimes, or they really want their solution to be picked. But if there's someone that's good at sort of like guiding folks and keeping like some code of conduct into place, those people are super valuable. So the format that we picked for sort of stating the solution is an ADR, and you can read more about what an ADR is at this article by Michael Nygaard. And the format of the ADR is just these 4 things. So there's context. So what the context is, what information did you think about while making this decision? The actual decision, so whether or not you picked like Splunk for your logging. The rationale behind it, so like why did you do this? What did you check? Things of that nature. And then the consequences. So not everything is perfect, right? We all know this. And if someone publishes an ADR without any consequences, then they're lying to you. So there must be some drawbacks because not every solution is perfect. And then the person submits that solution. And the solution has to be something that's kind of already running in production, right? It's not something that we have to go buy. We already have to have a license for it. Some set of people already have to have had experience in the company for it. Because then you get into this weird state where you recommended something and you want to use it as a solution, but you have to wait for it to be built or to be procured. And then that's not buying us any value. But over time, like these things are not set in stone, right? We can go back and change them. We try to like keep ourselves very nimble because we know that change is going to come. And keeping ourselves nimble does not mean that we are afraid of vendor lock-in, by the way. And then we come to consensus on this, right? So imagine a large organization trying to come to consensus on one thing. So the first ones were easy, like the source control, because there was like only one solution that people picked. But we did one for CI/CD, and you can imagine that everyone has their favorite CI/CD solution. So we had to come up with new ways of voting and sort of weeding down the projects as they go. One thing that we noticed with the CI/CD one is people would like throw out an option, but they didn't want to give any effort into writing the ADR. So then that allowed us to like immediately like zap them because they didn't want to put effort. Like even if it was good, if you're not willing to like justify why you want to use it, then it doesn't make sense for us, right? The other thing of when we're coming to consensus and we've picked a solution, we want to make sure that we capture the areas that the solution doesn't cover. So either we go back and fix them, or we go back and contribute them, or we ask, we address them in some fashion. So some solutions that we've picked so far, the team is only like a year and a half or maybe 2 years, or this initiative. We've picked source control, which I showed you. We've picked the CI/CD platform, which is Concourse, YAML. And we have an observability stack that we're currently working on with a bunch of tools together. I guess it's good to mention that the solution doesn't need to be one tool. It could be a combination of tooling. So what are some learnings from this exercise? I mentioned communication earlier. And also marketing. You have to be good at marketing, so you have to like get your ideas out there. You have to make people aware of the gills and make people aware of the initiatives. Like sometimes, even though I think I'm doing a good job, like I go to a different office and people have no idea what I'm talking about. And that just means that like I failed at my job. But it almost feels like we should hire a marketing department just for this stuff, right? Or a communications department. Sometimes you need to require a change. I know that the company really believes in not requiring something to happen, like it should happen organically. But sometimes people just can't come together. And then sometimes folks are resistant because they just want to be heard. So this just means that people might seem like they don't want to adopt the thing that you're recommending, but that's because you're not listening to them, right? So they don't necessarily want to have their thing adopted or their version of the solution, but they want you to listen to how they use the tool that they're currently using and help them figure out how to do that workflow in the current tool. Working groups can inform each other. So the order of working groups can matter, right? So for the source control working group, one of the recommendations that we had was a branching strategy, which informs some of the stuff that we're doing with CI/CD. I don't really have a lot of summary, but think about how to cleverly scale yourself. You need to collaborate with people, right? And then I guess your organization, even though it might be a big organization and it seems like change can't happen, change will happen. It's just a very slow process. I think that has been the biggest learning for me. Like, it's just learning patience, right? Like, I just can't say, hey, everyone, like, stop, like, you should deploy more, and they'll do it, right? Because that could cause all types of problems. So patience, saying things over and over, being ready for something when a catastrophe has happened. So let's say the company is suffering from a problem and no one has been listening to you, just keep that in your back pocket for when you're like, oh, like, you know, like you can do safer deploys doing this, this solution. And then that's it. So if you have any questions, I can take a few if I have time. Also, my team is hiring. If this interests you, or if you think this is completely wrong and you want to change how it's done, yeah.